46 times these books pass from hand to hand. 7 times they are taken away, sometimes by force, sometimes by a trick, sometimes just without asking. 4 times somebody tries to destroy them, and the show puts 17 people on screen holding one of these books. Of those 17, 4 had been looking for it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's a good time. It really does help us out. Tonight we're going through the journals of Gravity Falls. Not what's written in them, the books themselves. 3 objects, each with its own life, its own owners, and its own ending. Somewhere along the way I'll get something wrong. A name, an episode number, who said what, where exactly. Tell me in the comments. I read them, and on things like that I always answer. I'm going to ask these things the same questions you would ask about a person. That's what the anthropologist Igor Kopytov proposed, and he left a ready-made list for it. Where does the thing come from and who made it? What has been its career so far? What are the recognized ages in the thing's life, and what are the cultural markers for them? And the last question, the one whose answer turns out to be the shortest here, what happens to the thing when it reaches the end of its usefulness? 4 questions, 3 books. Every chapter takes 1 journal and answers 1 question about it, and each time I'll say which of the 4 I'm asking. Let me say in advance what this won't be. Not the life of the man who wrote these books, that's a separate story. Not the ciphers, either the codes in the credits or the codes on the pages. And not the thing that usually takes up the entire conversation about the journals, the contents. Which creatures are described, what their weaknesses are, what the author recommends doing about them. All of that stays off to one side. What's left is the part that usually gets 1 sentence before everyone moves on. Who held these books? Who had them taken away and how? Where they sat while people searched? What the people who ended up with them did with them, and almost every one of them ended up with a book by accident. So this won't be a story about the town's secret. It will be a story about 3 things that were almost never together, though one man wrote them at one desk, one after another. You can turn the light off. Nothing ahead is going to get loud. The volume won't jump, and if you fall asleep in the middle, that's fine. That's what this is for. We'll start at the very beginning, the day a blank notebook was still lying on a desk with no number on it. Walk into a second-hand bookshop and pull the cheapest book off the shelf. There's a fair chance you'll find an inscription on the flyleaf. A name, a date, sometimes a wish. Somebody was giving something to somebody, and it took half a line. You don't know the person and never will, but for a couple of seconds you honestly think about them. Who they were, why the book left the house, how many hands it went through before it reached this shelf. Then you pay at the till and forget. I read those inscriptions every time, even when I have no intention of buying. A pointless habit, but tonight it comes in useful. Igor Kopytov proposed stopping right there and going on asking. In 1986, a collection came out on the social life of things, and the first chapter in it is his essay on the cultural biography of things. The word biography stands in the title of his essay, in the title of a section inside it, and in the title of his conclusion. A separate part explains how such a biography is written. The idea is planted at every load-bearing point of the text, so there was no way he could have dropped it in passing. The move sounds like an elegant game, and in practice it changes what you notice at all. The word biography drags an assumption behind it. Things happened to this object. It had good years and bad ones. It could rise in people's eyes and it could fall. It could be a treasure to one person and junk to another on the same day. The question, what's it worth, assumes nothing of the kind. A price has no past. It exists now. You can see the difference on any household object. A grandfather's watch nobody wears sits in a drawer as junk right up to the day somebody decides to sell it. That's when it turns out that to the family it had been memory all along. To the buyer, it's a mechanism with a price. And to the grandson, it eventually goes to, it will become the first reason to think about his grandfather. One object, three answers, all three true. Books are not what Kopytov worked on, stretching his idea to books is mine. And here it's easy to confuse with the history of a text. The history of a text asks what is written and how the writing changed, which editions there were, what was cut between them, where the error came from that travels from copy to copy. The biography of a thing asks about one specific copy, where it sat, who held it, what was done to it, and who it got in the way of. The same text lives in 100,000 copies, and every copy has its own fate. This one burned, this one stood unread for 40 years, this one had its corners worn down by somebody carrying it in a coat pocket. Now a caveat. Kopytov didn't pass this approach off as his own invention. He names a predecessor himself, a man who as early as 1910 proposed tracing how a particular object moves from hand to hand. And he says himself that the biography of a thing isn't exhausted by its owners. A list of hands is a skeleton. To it you have to add what was done with the thing in those hands and what it counted as in each pair. A trophy today, evidence tomorrow, kindling the day after. The first of the four questions is who made it? For most books, the answer is so dull that nobody asks. A printing house, a print run, a warehouse, a shop shelf. The author's name on the cover answers for the text and says nothing about the object. It's identical on every copy at once. With the book tonight's story begins with, it works differently. It has a birthday, and that day is shown. A room, a desk, a blank notebook, and a man who is about to do several strange things to it in a row. The inscription on a second-hand flyleaf survives in the object by oversight. Nobody meant to tell the next owner anything. The mark on our book's cover was put there on purpose, before any content at all, and by now you can't take it off without ruining the thing. Question 1. Who made this thing? The scene that answers it starts as somebody else's account and immediately stops being one. Stan begins telling the kids how it all started, and at that point, Ford takes over the talking himself. Hello, this is Stanford Pines. From there he tells it in the first person, and the kids interrupt him, not Stan. For the biography of an object, that's a rare piece of luck. The birth of a thing almost never gets documented. There's nobody to do it and no reason. The thing means nothing yet at that minute. And usually the thinnest part of such a biography is exactly its beginning. Here the book's birthday reached us from the maker himself, firsthand. Ford knows he'll have to record his findings, so he starts a journal. Before the first entry, he takes a sheet of paper and traces the outline of his own hand. He cuts the tracing out and glues it to the cover. And there, on top of the hand, he puts the number of the volume. The order of operations is more interesting than the operation. The book is marked first and filled in second. A man with years of fieldwork ahead of him spends his first minutes establishing that the thing is his and was made by him. After that, the show gives the work in short pieces, the way you show a working routine. A jar with bat eyes in it, cliffs hanging in the air, a meeting with a gnome. Between those shots, the contents of the book accumulate. Somebody walked the woods, looked, caught things, sketched and wrote. And that's how everything people will later hunt for got collected. Now for what these books look like from outside. A caveat first. The show itself never describes the covers, so what follows is fan observation from freeze frames. The first and third journals are burgundy. All three have a gold six-fingered hand in the center of the cover and 2 gold stripes on the spine. What differs between them is the number on the hand and how worn they are. The first journal is the thickest. It has 3 gold corners out of 4, and a large piece is torn out of the top right of the cover. The second survived better than the others. The third has all 4 corners, but the cover is rubbed and torn at the edges. Of those differences, one was put there by a man and the other grew on its own. The number on the hand was written by hand, in one go, in advance. The torn corner, the rubbing and the tears were nobody's plan. They accumulated through years of lying about, being carried, riding in other people's pockets. Even from the outside, you can see where the work of the man who started the book ends and its own life begins. That, more or less, is the whole list of markings. And here's the strange part. Almost nothing else about the physical book is known. What they're made of, what size they are, what they weigh, no binding, no paper, no weight is ever named. About the pages there are lines. Past a certain point the entries stop and half the book is blank. This is where I could add a thick leather binding and a size of 2 hands across, and it would be an invention. And inventions are not something I'll tell you. What's known is the colour, the mark, the 2 stripes on the spine, and how battered the book is. For an object we've built an entire conversation around, that's a thin haul. The mark on the cover, though, says an unusual amount. An ordinary book introduces its author in set type, letters, a typeface, identical across the whole print run, anything anyone could typeset. Here the cover carries the outline of one particular hand with one particular number of fingers. You can't reproduce it without that hand. You can copy somebody else's tracing, and what you'll have is a copy of somebody else's palm. The number of the volume is written inside the outline, right on the palm. The numbering of all 3 books lives inside the print of one body. That strikes me as the fullest answer about origin an object is capable of giving on its own. Who made this thing? Here he is, life-size, on the cover, and to read it you don't have to open the book or know the language it's written in. You only have to put your own hand against the cover and see that the fingers don't match. Everything that happens to these books later, other people's hands, years in the dark, attempts to take them, attempts to destroy them, happens to objects with the traced hand of a man who once sat down at a desk with a blank notebook, not yet knowing there would be more than one. The question stays the same. Who made these books and how? It's just asked of all 3 at once now. Page through the first journal to the last page. There's a note there saying the rest continues in the second. It's written right on the page, nobody says it out loud, and it sits at the very end, where the room simply ran out. That's how notebooks behave. One filled up, the man started the next, and on the last spread he marked where to look for the continuation. The entries ran on in order. Retellings of the journal's story are almost always built the other way. The author split his research into 3 parts and hid the parts in different places so nobody could put them together. That isn't in the source. Across the whole show, 4 lines explain why the books were hidden and why they need collecting. I'll go through all 4, it won't take long. Gideon explains it to his father. The author hid the journals where nobody would find them because he knew that if they were brought together, they would open a gateway to unimaginable power. Gideon again, alone with himself. He needs all 3 to unlock that power. Ford tells Stan he shut the machine down and hid the journals that explain how to run it. And Stan, looking back on his 30 years, without the other 2 journals, it was hopeless. 4 lines and all 4 about the same thing, that the books were hidden and that they have to be brought together. Not one says why there turned out to be 3. The reason for the division is never spoken by anyone in the show, not once, not by hint. Look at who says them too. 4 lines, 3 speakers. 2 are Gideon hunting the books. 1 is the man who hid them. 1 is the man who spent 30 years collecting them. People for whom 3 journals are a problem to be solved. It never occurs to any of them to ask why there are 3. The number is a given, like the number of locks on somebody else's door. A burglar doesn't ask why there are 3 locks. Living alongside this is the idea that the journals are useless apart and only work as a set. That's easy to test. Dipper gets through an entire summer with the 3rd journal alone, and it's an eventful summer. Gideon gets through an entire season with the 2nd alone and is perfectly happy with it. The book serves him reliably the whole time. Both books work fine on their own, and the show demonstrates it across hours of screen time. What's useless apart is one thing: the code that starts the portal. That is assembled from 3 books, and a man with 1 journal out of 3 runs into a wall for 30 years. What turns out to be incomplete without the others is one specific set of instructions, the one that switches the machine on. And here I'm left with a question I couldn't answer. Gideon knows his journal inside out. He works from that book for a whole season and knows it down to the details. That a 3rd book exists anywhere he doesn't know. When the 3rd journal reaches his hands, he says out loud that he's surprised there are 3 at all. There's an obvious line of reasoning. If the end of the 1st journal points to the 2nd, then the end of the 2nd should point to the 3rd, which means the owner of the 2nd was bound to know. It's a pretty argument, and it rests on a premise I can't check. Whether his book had the same note at the end, we don't know. Gideon never mentions it, and we're never shown the last page of his book. So the question stays a question. There are guesses about it among fans, several of them, and not one can be checked against the source. And the main question of this chapter stays open until all 3 books lie side by side for the first time and somebody reads them. Why there turned out to be 3, the story does have an answer to that. It's just that you have to look for it a long way from the intentions of the man who started these books. Night, the study upstairs. There's a skull on the shelf, and Ford turns it away from himself so the empty sockets face the wall. The brothers haven't seen each other in 10 years. The man of the house is clearing an extra pair of eyes out of the room. Then he says why he called. There isn't much time. He's made huge mistakes and doesn't know who he can trust anymore, and there's something his brother needs to see. The conversation moves downstairs into the underground lab where the portal stands behind glass. 2 grown men in one room for the first time in 10 years stand in front of a machine. Ford explains, it's a trans-universal gateway. He's shut it down, and he hid the journals that explain how to run it. 1 journal is left, and there's only 1 person he can trust to take it. Take the book, get on a boat, sail as far away as you can to the edge of the earth, and bury it where no one can find it. A boat, the edge of the earth, a hole in the ground, a place where nobody will find it. That's how treasure gets hidden in adventure novels, and the request comes in exactly that vocabulary. Except what Ford is proposing to do it with is a notebook he started and filled himself. The ages of a thing are told apart by what gets done with it, and for this journal, the marker turns out to be very simple: what its owner orders done with it. While Ford kept his entries, the book lived in the age of a working notebook, carried around, pasted into, opened every evening. On the night of this conversation, it moves into the next age, and the move takes 1 sentence. A thing you've been told to bury at the edge of the earth is not a thing anyone intends to read. It's a thing to be transported and hidden. What was meant to be separated that night was the book and the machine. The conversation was about getting the notes as far as possible from what they describe. Nobody was pulling the journals apart from each other yet. Book and portal are standing in 1 room right now, and the whole request comes down to putting an ocean between them. No refusal is spoken. Stan takes offense, makes a scene, and then grabs the book. You want me to get rid of this book? I'll get rid of it right now. He pulls out a lighter and holds the book over the flame. Fire isn't about a place, it's about leaving no place at all. In one night, the book collects 3 possible fates in a row. It was being written, it was going to be shipped out and buried, and now it's being held over a flame. Not one of the three comes true. The fight starts. Ford shoves his brother onto the console and is instantly frightened, apologizes, asks if he's all right. This is where Stan gets the burn on his back, and then Stan shoves Ford. After that, it goes very fast. Ford is lifted off the floor and pulled toward the light behind the glass. In mid-air, he does the thing that sets up the entire later history of these books. He throws the journal back into the room and shouts his brother's name. The man who, a minute earlier, was asking for this notebook to be taken across an ocean, sends it, in his last second, in exactly the opposite direction, back to the person who had just been holding it over a lighter. He doesn't get to explain. There's no time. The show never names the reason. Trust is as plausible there as the desperation of a man with 1 second and one free hand. Stan pulls the lever. The portal doesn't come back. For the biography of the object, here's what follows from that night. The book sailed nowhere. No boat, no ocean, no hole at the edge of the earth ever came into its life and never will. The request was spoken out loud, and that was the end of it. It spent the night in the same house where it had once been laid on a desk blank. The fire never reached the pages. This is the first of 4 attempts to destroy a journal that the show puts on screen, and the first failure. The book was held over a flame and not burned because a fight got in the way. Nobody changed their intentions that evening. The age the book entered that night turned out to be a long one. It isn't carried into the field anymore, and nothing more gets written in it. From this point on, it's hidden, seized, searched for, and subjected to attempts at destruction, and not one of those activities has anything to do with reading. Ford turned the skull away that evening so nothing would look at him, and asked for the book to be buried so nobody would find it. Of his 2 requests that night, only the first was carried out, and he carried it out himself with his own hand a minute before everything else. He didn't know whether his brother was alive or dead. He knew one thing: the answer had to be in the journal. That thought is where the 30 years begin that the first journal will spend underground. The setting of those years describes itself briefly. Stan sleeps on a couch downstairs, and 2 things lie beside him: the book and his brother's glasses. He turns the lever with a screwdriver. The machine sparks and dies. Then he turns it again, and it dies again, and so on for weeks on end, with no witnesses and nobody's help. Then for years. You ask a thing, as you ask a person, what its career has been. With a field journal, the answer seems settled in advance. It gets added to, checked against, returned to for what's written in it, and the longer it lives, the more valuable the writing becomes. The first journal got a different job. It was opened for one technical question: how to switch the machine on. Nothing else. Roger Chartier, the French historian of the book, wrote that the same text presented in a different material form stops being the same text. Here everything runs the other way. The form didn't change at all. The same notebook, the same handwriting, the same traced hand on the cover, the same order of pages, which nobody touched. The carrier stayed as it was. What changed was the reader and what he opened the book for. The glasses lying next to it deserve a separate word. 2 things were left of the vanished man that Stan kept close, downstairs, by the machine. The difference between them is that nothing was required of the glasses. They lay there as a trace of someone who had been. The book was obliged to work. For 30 years it was memory and instrument at once, and as an instrument it wasn't managing. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's a good time. It really does help us out. A researcher's notebook, full of descriptions of what lives in the woods around the town, served for 30 years as the manual to a broken device. Everything written in it besides that was background to the reader it had then. He was looking in it for a working instruction, and judging by the result, he wasn't finding everything he needed. 30 years is a great many attempts, and each one ends in a spark and silence. Another rarity of those years, a single reader. There's one copy, and the one person we see with this book is also one. No other version of it exists anywhere. For any ordinary book, that situation is unthinkable. Here it lasted 3 decades. Paging the book to the end, he sees the note on the last page. The rest continues in the second journal. Nobody says it out loud. The line is simply shown, and the man who paged that far understands at once that the search goes further. It's a short line. One line on a last page sets up everything this man will be doing for the next 3 decades. Then something entirely prosaic happens. Stan runs out of food. He goes up, walks into town, and that's where the mystery shack begins. A whole business grows out of a man in a basement having nothing left to eat. And the book stays downstairs. The request that started it all went: get on a boat, take it across an ocean, bury it where nobody will find it. Of all the addresses in the world, the notebook got the one closest to the point of its birth. The same house, a few floors below the desk it was written at. How all that work with the screwdriver ended, the show does put on screen and in detail. That scene is still a long way off, and when we get there, it will turn out that the basement had been keeping more than the book. And the first journal does come up from underground in the end. The second to last time it appears on its own, apart from the other two, looks like this. Woods, daylight, the book in Mabel's hands. 0 scenes, 0 lines. That's what the show spends across both seasons on how the second journal reached its owner. The first thing we see of this book, it's already in Gideon's hands, and he opens it the way you open something long since yours and well known. That's the start of the strangest biography of the 3. The career of the second journal begins in the middle. It's already somebody's, already in use, already being worked from, and there's no starting point. If you go looking for an answer, you'll almost certainly meet a ready-made version. The book was dug up near the school. That version came from outside, from beyond the show. Inside it, there's no such scene, no such line, and no hint of one in anybody's words. I stay with what's shown, which leaves one formulation. The show doesn't explain it. The show leaves a lot unexplained, and that's fair. Where exactly the second and third journals lay for 30 years is never named. When the third journal passed from Dipper to Ford before the final fight is never shown. Why Ford gathered all 3 books that evening is never said. There is a counter-argument, though. Handovers the show puts on screen willingly and in detail. Books are taken by force, shaken out of pockets, given away freely, lifted out of the ground. There are many such scenes. The setting of nearly every one is worked out closely, down to which room it happened in and how the conversation ended. Against that background, the one handover that doesn't exist at all looks like a missing link. The difference between those gaps and ours is where they sit. All the holes listed above are in the middle or at the end of a biography already begun. We know the thing, we know its owners, and one crossing simply stayed off camera. A gap in the middle of a route fills itself in because both edges are known and the imagination just draws the line between them. The second journal is missing its first point. With the first, we watched a blank book laid on a desk and given its cover, and the third turned up in front of the viewer's own eyes. A hatch in the woods, the book under it, the boy who lifted it out. The second has no scene of discovery, no account of one after the fact, no slip of the tongue from anybody. Between the moment it was hidden and the moment it's in Gideon's hands, there is nothing at all. Blank. The second oddity of this book is of the same kind. The number of the second journal is never said out loud in the entire show. The journals get numbered aloud only a handful of times, almost all of it collected in the first season finale, and the numbers there are spoken by Gideon. He talks about the third journal and about the first. Nobody ever calls the second one by its number, which makes for a curious situation. The man who had the second book counted other people's out loud. His own he simply has. It's right there, and there's no reason for him to call it by a number. What gets numbered out loud is what's being looked for. Put those two features together, namelessness and no known origin, and you get an object that's rare for this show. A book with no shown provenance and no spoken name. A thing that in the characters' conversations exists as this book, this one here, mine. Everything that makes an object identifiable from outside is missing from it, and yet the book is there, at his elbow, doing its job. Nothing else about it is firmly known. The last time the second journal appears on its own, apart from the others, it's in a scene hard to mistake. Ford takes it with him inside a flying saucer. Between those 2 points, a book that appeared in somebody's hands with no explanation, and a book carried into an alien craft, fits the whole shown life of the second journal. Everything before Gideon stayed outside it. The visiting room at the Gravity Falls prison. A boy in prison clothes at the table, his father across from him, other inmates with their guests around them. The boy reaches into his own hair and pulls out a sheet of paper. The sheet is torn out of a book. It's a page from the second journal. Written on it is a possession spell, and a note in red in the corner says it works exactly once. Gideon tells his father he's been saving this for a long time, waiting for the right moment. The book itself hasn't been his for 14 episodes. Gideon kept the second journal for the whole first half of the show. He leafed through it in his room, choosing how to answer the Pines family. A zombie attack he rejected because zombies don't take orders. Blood rain because it would mess up his suit. And at demon caterpillars he simply swore and snapped the book shut. Later he announced it was time to unlock the journal's greatest secret, and unlocked it. It ended at the cliff where his giant robot came down, with him led away in handcuffs in front of the whole town, while Stan shook him by the clothes, picked the fallen second journal up off the ground, and carried the book away, covered with the deed to his house that he retrieved in the same minute. By then, the page was no longer in the book. The moment it gets torn out is never shown. That it happened before the arrest is an inference from the order of events, not something a shot confirms. After the arrest, Gideon has no book, and he does have the page. What I don't understand is why that shot wasn't filmed. The scene has everything. A child tears a leaf out of somebody else's manuscript because he's decided he'll need that leaf later. The ages of a thing with a book, they're usually counted on the whole book. New, well-read, battered, falling into loose leaves. With the second journal, something rare happened. Part of it started aging separately from the rest. While the journal itself lay in the basement under a house, the torn page went through arrest and prison together with its former owner, hidden in his hair. 14 episodes in a row. From some point on, these two objects have different biographies, though not long before they were one thing, stitched at the spine. That detail is my favorite in the whole story of the journals. The only piece of Ford Pines' manuscript that lived through this summer, apart from its book, spent it in somebody else's hairdo. Then comes that visiting room. Gideon unfolds the sheet, reads the spell, and takes possession of his own father. A one-use tool he'd been saving all this time is spent on the man who came to visit him. The page itself has exactly 2 ages, and they're easier to tell apart than any books. The note in the corner splits its life in half. Until the spell is read, the sheet is a means, and once it's read, it becomes paper. A book can be reread, and it only wears out gradually. A single-use page ages instantly and all at once. The plan falls apart by the end of the episode. When it becomes clear that nothing worked, Gideon tears the page in half, throws a television and tears at his own hair, the same hair the sheet lay in all that time. In the whole history of the 3 journals, this is the only case where part of a book took up a life of its own. The volumes were seized, dropped, hidden and burned whole. They were hauled around the way a suitcase is hauled. Here one leaf was separated from a book, and what survived the story was the leaf, not the binding. Gideon had the book taken off him in front of half the town, and the page was never found and never looked for. The 2 halves of the sheet the show never shows again. What became of them is not stated in a single line, and that isn't the only question left about this page. The main one is how it came apart from the book at all, on the day the book was shaken out of its owner in public. To the man who shook it out, we'll come back separately. He has his own part in this story, and it's bigger than it looks. The page was the exception. The rest of this story moved around whole as books, and one journal didn't move at all before the show began. Dipper, 12 years old, is hammering up signs in the woods, hits a metal hatch in the ground, and pulls a thick, battered book out from under it, in dust and cobwebs. He carries it home. We won't take that minute apart. For the root of the book, exactly one thing about it matters. The journal changed owners. The place where the book had been lying is more interesting. The hatch turned out not to be the only door on that patch of ground. Later, the kids come back to the same tree and open a way down under it. Below is a bunker, the underground refuge of Ford Pines, the very man whose handwriting fills the whole 3rd journal. Rooms, corridors, stairs, tunnels that at some point flood with water, and a cage. In the cage, back in the author's time, sat a creature that can take on other people's shapes, a shapeshifter. He tells the children plainly later, "He was writing his journal while I was locked up in here. Put that together." The book the boy lifted out from under the hatch had been lying on the lid of its own author's bunker. Beneath it, through a few meters of earth, was the room where, by the prisoner's own account, that book was written. The journal lay there until that very day, directly above the place of its birth. What career the thing had, the 3rd journals begins with a long pause. It stayed home, under the lid of a hatch, and waited for the lid to open. That changes a fair amount about how the whole story looks. The boy who lifted the book will spend the rest of the summer trying to work out who wrote it. And this man's rooms stood under that same tree the entire time, 1 floor down. While the boy leafed through the book up in his attic, all that stood between him and them was a staircase he didn't know about yet. From there, the book's career went domestic. It was carried in a coat pocket and in a backpack, pulled out in the woods, read in an attic, put on top of a bookcase where it couldn't be reached afterwards. It was handled like a reference book that has to be within arm's reach, and from that handling, nobody could have guessed the object was unique and existed in a single copy. And it will go back under that same lid one day. Later, in the 2nd season, the journal comes down into the bunker in the children's hands, the only object in this story that returns to its own birthplace, even if not for long. After that, the book went from hand to hand, and there will be many hands, but this summer has one ending. At the end of the 1st season, Dipper comes to Stan and shows him the journal himself. He says he found this book in the woods and that it explains everything going on in Gravity Falls. Then about Gideon, who nearly destroyed the town over it, and about how after everything they've been through, his uncle should probably know. Stan answers in his usual register, a magic book, ridiculous, and asks whether he can borrow it, and walks off with it. Dipper reaches to take the book back. Mabel holds him and tells him he's a hero whether he's got that journal or not, and to his protest that he still wants it back, she answers with a question. What would a boring old man like Stan want with that book anyway? There's no other handover like it in the story of the 3 journals. The book goes to a new owner because the previous one brought it over and showed it himself. So the 3rd journal changed owners for the 2nd time that summer. The first time it was pulled out from under a hatch beneath a tree because a boy had been sent into the woods to hammer up signs. The 2nd time it was carried into an adult's hands because the boy decided the adult should know. In neither case was anybody involved in the handover whose actual work was books. An ordinary book has a road, and that road is described in some detail. The author writes a manuscript and takes it to a publisher. The publisher settles things with a printer. The printer sets the type and runs the edition. A shipper collects the finished bundles, carries them to a wholesaler and a shop. The bookseller puts the book on a shelf and sells it to a reader. The reader reads, and the road doesn't end there. He tells his friends, writes to the author, buys the next book, and word of how it all turned out comes back to the man sitting down to write more. That's how the historian Robert Darnton described the road in an essay from 1982 on what the history of books actually is. He called it a communications circuit and insisted on the word circuit. The ring closes, the end of the road is joined to its beginning. Let's lay the circuit over our 3 books and see what survives. There is no publisher, no printer, no print run, no price either. Not one of the 3 journals ever sat on a counter, ever had a cover with an author's name on it, or was ever sold to anybody for any money. No shipper either. The books moved around the town in pockets, in backpacks, and under the arms of whoever was holding them. And there's no reader in Darnton's sense, the one who picked this book out from others, paid for it and carried it home. Asking these books what their career has been, therefore, has to go differently. Instead of a chain of jobs, they have a list of hands. The 3rd journal got its corner chewed by a goat in the Mystery Shack yard on the very first day. Later, the same journal spent a minute with 2 federal agents. Dipper brought them the book himself. One of them leafed through it, hit a spread about yet another local creature and handed it back, saying it looked like junk from his uncle's gift shop. The 3rd was held further on too. An actor from the local company played a reverend on stage, and the journal was his prop. A girl from a rich family yanked the book toward herself and dropped it along with Dipper. Wendy knocked it out of somebody else's tongue with a piece of scrap metal. An old man from the town leafed through this journal in a car, the one person who was present while these books were being written and remembers none of it. With the 1st journal, this list has one case. Mabel's friend took it off her to howl a unicorn summons out of it in the lowest voice she could manage. The only commercial appraisal these books received in their whole history is that gift shop. It was delivered by a man who came to town on official business, and a minute later he drove away. In Darnton's circuit, everybody holds the book by duty. The publisher because it's his trade, the printer because he owns the press, the bookseller because it's his living. Here the book lands in hands because somebody got into a fight, helped out, came on official business, got curious, was putting on a play, or simply stood nearby and chewed. Darnton, to his credit, warned that the general scheme doesn't fit every case. The biography of a particular book, he wrote, doesn't follow one pattern, and any circuit has to be checked against actual material. Our material falls out of the scheme entirely, and it's fairer to count that as a feature of these books than as a fault in his scheme. So what's left once you remove the publisher, the printer, the shipper, and the bookseller? What's left are the handovers, and the show gives each one its own scene with its own setting. A mystery shack yard full of gnomes, a cliff with the wreckage of a robot, police, and a news camera, a parking lot, a prison visiting room, a flooded tunnel, an attic room with a bookcase. a theatre stage. And still, one part of the circuit these books did close, in their own way. Darnton said the word comes back to the author. Ford Pines got his first journal back after 30 years. He stepped out of the portal into the very room where the book had been waiting for him and picked it up with a 6-fingered hand. And the third journal came back to him read, with somebody else's notes in it. He tells Dipper himself that he's read the additions to his journal and he's impressed. The show puts 7 seizures on screen. For 3 notebooks that never once left the town, that's quite a lot. The ages of these notebooks are told apart by other people's hands, by whether the book is being taken away or not. The first seizure happened 30 years before everything else, in the underground lab, where Stan was holding his brother's book over a lighter. Ford lunged to take it back, and the book ended up with Stan. The second is the Mystery Shack yard. Dipper and Mabel have just been put out of the house. It belongs to Gideon now, and the children come back to the porch with an army of gnomes to demand the deed. Gideon turns the gnomes to his own side, and in the struggle that follows, the third journal passes to him. The book is Gideon's. He says this is the one place he'd never have thought to look, and that the boy had it the whole time. And then he adds the line the scene seems to have been written for. Every victory Dipper had came from this book, and without it, he's nothing. The book changed owners in a scuffle. It went to a man who had been looking for it for half the show, and until that minute had no idea where it was. And it's this loss that drives the children out of town. Dipper tells his sister that the only courageous or worthwhile things he ever did, he did because of that book. And then, well, that's it. The boss should be here soon. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's a good time. It really does help us out. The third seizure is the quietest in the show and, to my mind, the most brazen. The cliff where the giant robot came down. Wreckage, police, a news camera, the whole town gathered. Gideon is led away in handcuffs for conspiracy and fraud. Stan shakes him by the clothes. Things spill out of him, among them the second journal and the deed to the house. Stan holds the deed up and says he believes this belongs to him. The book is hidden behind it. Gideon goes off to prison without once asking out loud where his book went. The fourth was done by deception. The bunker under the tree, that same shapeshifter, this time in the author's shape, tells the children he lost his journals many years ago. Dipper hands the book over himself, and when he asks for it back, he hears that nobody is going anywhere. Then a fight. The shapeshifter catches the journal with his tongue. Wendy knocks it loose with a piece of metal. There's no scene of the book being returned. In the next episode, it's with Dipper again. The fifth is domestic. Mabel informs her brother on the run that she borrowed the journal for a play as a prop and will be gone before he processes it. Dipper at that minute has no body. The book half the town is at war over is hidden inside a fake wedding cake above a stage. The sixth is in the woods. Mabel reads in the first journal that a unicorn summons has to be howled in the lowest voice possible. Her friend takes the book, promises to handle it herself, and howls. A unicorn appears. The journal comes back to Mabel in the same scene, the only case of a book being taken away in order to howl properly. The seventh is the last. A demon takes the third journal from Dipper by telekinesis, and it ends in fire. There's nothing left to take. Now for what isn't on the list. In 30 years, nobody made an attempt on the first journal while Stan had it. Nobody went near the second until Gideon was in handcuffs. For the whole first half of the show, he carried that book around as calmly as a school book. Taking and destroying are different occupations, and the second went worse. The lighter in the basement never reached the pages. The demon inside Dipper's body announced that the journal was next and was hit in the face with that journal. Gideon tore the page from the second volume in half, the only damage in the show a person managed to inflict. There are 17 holders of the 3 journals, and searchers among them are countable on one hand. Two have already passed through this chapter. One took the book in a scuffle, the other shook it out of somebody's clothes. Who was really hunting is a separate conversation, and we'll get to it. Of the 7 seizures, 4 ended with the book eventually returning to where it was taken from. 1 ended in a bonfire. Twice more it stayed with the person who took it, and both times that was the same man. The gift shop of the mystery shack. Stan pulls a vending machine away from the wall. Behind it is a door with a keypad. He enters the code, goes down the stairs, steps into an elevator. Beside the elevator is a panel where 4 alchemical marks have to be pressed in order. He hits the down button and comes out on the 3rd underground floor. That's what the road to 3 books looks like. And not long before that, upstairs, there had been another conversation. The shack had just been returned to the family, and Dipper handed his uncle the 3rd journal himself. After everything they'd been through, he thought his uncle ought to know. Stan turned the book over in his hands, called it a magic book, and asked if he could borrow it. Mabel told her brother that a boring old man like Stan had nothing to do with that book anyway. 1 handover, 2 sides. Upstairs, it looks like an act of trust. Downstairs, a little later, the book goes onto a desk as the 3rd of 3. Stan takes the 1st journal out of a drawer, the one that lay under this house for 30 years. Beside it, he sets the 2nd, shaken out of Gideon under arrest. The 3rd was brought to him. He joins all 3, and on the combined pages, a composite image appears. He checks against it, throws switches, and the machine behind the glass lights up. He says out loud that after all these years, he finally has them all, that it's working, and here we go. The 1st season ends on a machine starting up. The children upstairs know nothing. The story of the 3 journals is usually retold like this. All 3 came together in one place when the children went down into the lab and saw that their uncle had been keeping somebody else's books and a working portal under the house all these years. In the source, that scene is the 2nd one. The 1st happened a whole season earlier, and in it, the machine has already started. That's my position, and I'll defend it. What viewers remember as a mid-2nd season revelation, the show played out in front of them much earlier and completely openly. There is no withholding in the 1st season finale. The books are shown, the man is shown, the startup is shown, and so are his words about finally having them all. The 2nd season doesn't reveal this secret, it explains it to the other characters. Stan needs the journals as a part, which is the answer to the question of what gets done with a thing when it's no longer needed. Later, he'll tell Dipper the thing was so boring he couldn't even finish it, and in that part, he seems honest. 3 notebooks are laid together so a drawing will line up, the way you lay together a map torn in half, or 2 halves of a ticket. What's written on the pages means nothing at that minute. The geometry of the pages is what works. The age a book enters after people stop reading it is usually the last one. The 1st journal spent 30 years in it and stayed necessary the whole time, as an instruction that can't be carried out while 2 other parts are missing. That day, the parts finally turned up. One more thing worth saying separately. The 3 books came together in one place 3 times in their whole history, but their neighborhood was measured in months. Between that day and the start of the next season, all 3 belong to one man. The 1st in a lab drawer, the 2nd taken off a man under arrest, the 3rd borrowed from a nephew. The 2nd period starts later and runs to the very end. 2 journals live downstairs with Ford, the 3rd upstairs with Dipper, and the house is the same one. Dipper comes down with one of Ford's journals under his arm, and Ford, in front of him, takes out another. We left open the question of what that basement was keeping. The answer is complete now. It kept the machine Ford asked to have forgotten, and from that day it kept all 3 books that the same Ford had once distributed among hiding places so they would never be near each other. The man who brought them together first was the one for whom none of the three was needed as a book. Stan's office in the mystery shack. A photocopier stands against the wall, the lid up, the third journal lying open on the glass. Beside the machine stands a pig, watching. Stan turns to it and tells it that it didn't see anything. It's a flashback. It lasts a few seconds and cuts off there. The copy that came out of that machine never appears in the show again. First, how the book got into that room. Dipper comes up to his uncle in the gift shop and asks for the journal back, since there's a free minute. Stan pretends to search his pockets for it, produces it from under the counter, and says the old thing was so boring he couldn't even finish it. The boy carries his journal off, and straight after that scene comes the short flashback showing what the book had been doing while it lay under the counter. This copy has exactly one age. It was born, and that was the end of its biography. On the first journal, Chartier had already put the thought. The same text in a different material form stops being the same text. The bibliographer Donald Mackenzie, who lectured in 1985 on how a society handles its texts, says it harder. Forms affect meaning. The same set of words carried onto a different medium starts to mean something else. And the difference isn't a matter of convenience. These two are talking about one thing here. Look at what came apart. The original is a thick, hardbound notebook, written out by hand, with pasted-in pieces, diagrams and drawings, which lay for years under a metal hatch in the woods. People searched for it, fought over it, carried it under a jacket and hid it from adults. The copy is a stack of identical sheets that came out of an office machine in a couple of minutes. That's the closest these books ever came to a printing press in their whole history. The words on them are the same. Everything else is different. Mackenzie has a second thought that fits too. New readers make new texts, and their new meanings are a function of their new forms. With this copy, something rare happened. It never acquired a single reader. Right to the end of the show, the copy is never in anybody's hands and never comes up in a single conversation. Across the history of the three journals, they passed through somebody's hands dozens of times, and the show gives nearly every one of those crossings its own scene with an audience. The mystery shack yard, the cliff with the robot wreckage, police and a news camera, the flooded tunnel of the bunker. The copy's appearance has one witness, and it's a pig, who will tell nobody and won't go looking for what went missing. The only line spoken about this copy in the entire show is addressed to it. Stan asks it to keep quiet. It does. There's another subtlety. The copy took the third journal in the state the book was in at the start of the second season. By the end of the summer, the original had become a book by two authors. Dipper wrote his own additions into it. When the boy wrote them, the show doesn't show. So whether they made it onto the copier glass, I can't say. It would be easy to check. You'd only have to open the copy. Nobody opened it. The original collected many ages, and each one is recognizable by what was being done with the book. A working notebook being filled in, a hidden object, a find, spoils being fought over, a machine part, a prop hung above a stage inside a fake cake. The copy has not one crossing. It was never lost, never seized, never hidden and never read. And there's nothing in its life to tell apart. Why Stan went to the copier at all, the show doesn't explain and never returns to. It isn't hard to guess. He'd been asked for the book back, and he needed the pages of the third journal for the drawing to line up. He never takes the copy out again. 3 journals, and beside them a copy taken off one of them. The journals have a known, shown ending. And the copy, after those few seconds at the machine, walks out of frame, and where it ended up lying, nobody ever asks. The twins worked out the way into the lab themselves. In Stan's newspaper clippings, there was a combination of letters and numbers, and Mabel was the first to recognize it as the vending machine in the gift shop. Seuss was at the door and fought for it in earnest. He'd promised Stan to guard that entrance with his life and kept the promise until Mabel showered him with glitter. The three of them went down together. On the desk below lay 2 books. Dipper looks at the first and second journals, the 2 he never once held all summer. What he says next I'll put in my own words. The other 2 journals, Stan had them the whole time. Was anything he ever said true? And he kicks the desk. Somebody cautiously suggests that maybe their uncle is the author. Dipper answers that maybe he stole them from the author. Then he does the thing nobody had done with these books before him. He opens each one to the page with the portal, lays his own 3rd journal beside the 2 others, and switches on an ultraviolet lamp. Under the lamp, lines come up on the pages that aren't there in daylight. They're spread across the 3 books, a third of a sentence to each, and until this minute, the sentence had never stood whole on any page. I'll give it the way it assembles. The machine was meant for knowledge, but it's too powerful. The author was wrong all along. He was deceived, and now it's too late. At full power, the device could tear the universe apart. It must not fall into the wrong hands. If the countdown reaches 0, the universe is doomed. The countdown was already running. There was under 2 minutes left of it. Then the 3 of them turn 3 keys. A red shutdown button opens under them. Stan begs them not to press it, and Mabel lets go of the button seconds before the count runs out, saying that she believes him. The machine fires. Out of the portal walks the man who wrote these books. Now we can come back to the question I left open at the start. Why there turned out to be 3 journals. The answer was inside these books from the first day, and it's more modest than any version about divided research. What was divided wasn't the research, it was 1 sentence. The entries ran on the way notebooks run. One filled up, the next began, and the last page carries a note about where the continuation is. Exactly 1 sentence was made secret, let out across 3 bindings so that no one of them holds it whole, and it surfaces only under the lamp, with all 3 lying side by side, open at the same page. This wasn't the first time these 3 journals were laid together. At that same desk, in that same lab, Stan had already brought them together once, and brought them as a part. Pages were aligned so a drawing would match, and a man checked against the resulting picture and threw switches. The same 3 books, the same desk, the same portal page. 1 difference, this time they're being read. In the whole history of the 3 journals, this is the only case of them being opened and read together. They came together in one place several times. They were read once. What gets done with a thing when it's no longer needed? The warning answers that in advance, and answers it unpleasantly. It's built so as to become readable at exactly the minute when there's no longer any point in reading it. To collect all 3 journals is to do the whole road. Find, seize, buy out, shake out of somebody's pocket, receive as a gift. The man who finally has 3 books lying side by side has already done every one of the things he was going to be warned against. By that minute, the machine is either built or running or standing 1 floor below, counting down. The author spread that sentence across 3 notebooks, knowing it would be read only by whoever collected all 3, which is to say, by the 1 person in the world it can no longer help. The letter reached the right address and arrived late by exactly the length of the journey. And the man who searched for these books, loudest of all, was by that time long since in prison, and until his last day at liberty, he never knew he was digging above one of them. Back to the end of the first season. The house already belongs to Gideon, and in his hands is the third journal, the one that came to him in the scuffle. He puts the book on the table, slides it next to the second one lying there, hits the tabletop, and says out loud that at last he has it. At last he has journal number 3. There are 3 of them, he asks himself. And where's the first one then, if he needs all 3 to unlock that power? Then he draws a conclusion, and the conclusion is wrong. He says Dipper gave him the third journal and kept the first for himself. Dipper, later and already in the middle of a fight, answers that he has no idea what Gideon is talking about. The only journal he ever had was taken off him. Dipper is right. He never held the first journal, not that day, not before, not after. The whole first season finale is built on that mistake. Even before the scuffle over the third journal, Gideon is digging in the yard. He names his grounds himself, talking to his father. The ciphers and maps gave him the idea that another book is buried on this very property, and that's what he needed the mystery shack for. He walks the yard with a shovel, calling for the journal out loud, the way you call a lost dog. He finds nothing. The first journal at that minute is lying in a desk drawer on the 3rd underground floor, under the very yard where the shovel is working. Between them are 3 underground floors and a door whose code Gideon doesn't know and never will. The question about a thing's career gives an answer here that I didn't expect. A field journal's career counts as exemplary when it's being opened, added to, checked against, returned to for what's in it. The first journal spends this whole summer in a drawer doing precisely nothing. It isn't moved, isn't read, isn't opened. And it determines the behavior of an entire town. For its sake, a family had their house taken. For its sake, a yard was dug up. For its sake, a giant robot walked the streets while the town gathered to see how it would end. A thing that never moved a single meter all season turned out to be the cause of everything that happened in that season. It ends at the cliff where the giant robot came down. Dipper picks his third journal out of the smoking wreckage. The police arrive, and in front of the whole town, Gideon is led away in handcuffs. The charges are listed out loud: conspiracy, fraud, and breaking our hearts. And this is where Stan takes the man under arrest by the clothes and shakes him. Things spill out of his pockets, among them the deed to the house and the second journal. Stan picks up both, says something to the effect that he believes this belongs to him, and holds the deed up for everyone, keeping the book behind it. The sheriff is standing right there. The news camera is running. Nobody notices the theft except the viewer. Now for the page I promised not to forget. By that day, the sheet with the one-use spell has already been torn out of the second journal, and where it is, the show will demonstrate much later, in Gideon's hair. The book falls to the ground and goes to Stan. The sheet stays with its previous owner and rides off to prison with him. The moment it was separated from the book, the show never puts on screen in a single shot. Something else is shown, and it's enough. A man was shaken out in front of everybody, and not one person present was looking through that pile for a page. They were looking for the deed. The book fell out along the way. What he ended up with was not the book, but the house that stood above it. Gideon remains the only person in this whole story who genuinely dug in the earth, working through ciphers and checking against maps, and the only one who dug up nothing. He spent a whole season searching for a book while standing on it. A divided thing is protected precisely because diligence means nothing to it. Only somebody who knows all the addresses in advance can put it back together. A man who took that principle to its conclusion deliberately and on real manuscripts did exist. He cut books apart with his own hands. His name was Otto Ege. In 1938, an American magazine about hobbies and leisure ran an essay of his, and in the title of that essay he calls himself a biblioclast, a breaker of books. He picks the word up himself and picks it up as a challenge. He admitted no guilt and goes on in the text to explain calmly why he does what he does. He was a thoroughly respectable man, a teacher, a lecturer, and a book dealer. For years he worked at an art institute where he headed the department of teacher training, taught lettering, layout, and typography, and rose to dean. He taught the history of the book at a university school of library science. He died in 1951, and what he did was this. He cut medieval manuscript books into single leaves. The leaves were made up into sets, and the structure of a set is worth saying slowly because the whole point is in it. 50 leaves to a set, each leaf from its own manuscript, and there were exactly 50 manuscripts. 40 such sets were made. Now the interesting part about those sets. The leaf numbered 1 in any of the 40 comes from the same book. The leaf numbered 2 comes from another, and again in all 40. Which means each of the 50 manuscripts was laid out across exactly 40 addresses, 1 leaf per address. Nowhere and with nobody did a whole one remain. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's a good time. It really does help us out. He had an argument, and an intelligible one. In my own words, to let 1,000 people hold a real leaf of a manuscript in their hands and gain the understanding that comes only from touch is justification enough for the fragments having scattered. Here I have to stop and say something plainly, or this whole chapter will lie to you. Ige's motive was the opposite of what's going on in our story. He took books apart so that more people could touch them. A student at a small college, a school teacher, a library visitor in a town that had never seen a medieval manuscript. Division for the sake of access. In this discussion he works as a mirror. He was no ally of the man who scattered his notebooks among hiding places, and those two things must not be confused in a single sentence. The sets went out to colleges, libraries, and museums. After her husband's death, it was his widow who finished the business. She was the one who sold the sets and sent them out. Of the 40 sets, 28 have been found so far, by the count of the scholar who keeps that ledger. Where the other 12 are, nobody knows. Half a century later, researchers set about putting the dismembered manuscripts back together, leaf by leaf, from different cities and different countries, by digital photography. A university project has spent years tracking down the surviving sets in order to restore even one book whole. As an image, of course. Physically, it will never be assembled again. What gets done with a book when it's no longer needed? Ege had a ready answer, and he applied it to manuscripts nobody had read as books in a very long time. In his hands, such a book became teaching material. One volume yielded 40 visual aids, and each one travelled to its own town to work. The irony this biography ends on can be checked against documents. Ege's private collection was bought by a university library. In it were some 50 manuscript books he never touched, whole in their bindings, never once cut. The man who laid other people's books out across 40 addresses kept 50 whole ones at home. There's only one way to put a dismembered thing back together. Find out who has which part. That's work with a list of hands, and it takes decades. Our 3 books have such a list too, and it's far shorter than 40 addresses. The hands they passed through in their whole history can be counted, and every pair of those hands was busy with something at the minute the book arrived. That's what's worth a closer look. Let's go back to that scene at the cliff where Stan has the arrested man by the jacket. What he's after is the deed to his own house. That's what he finds, and what he holds up for everyone. Not a word about the journals in that minute. And the second journal drops out of the pocket along the way with everything else. 30 years of searching end sideways, in somebody else's pocket, in the middle of an entirely different piece of business, at a moment when the man who was searching is thinking about anything but the book. In this chapter, we ask about career, whose hands it passed through, and by what rule it chose owners. Our 3 books do have a rule, and it's harder than you'd expect. Not one journal ever reached the person searching for it by way of searching. Here's what that rests on. Stan got the second journal because he was shaking a man down over something else entirely. Stan got the third because Dipper decided to trust him. Ford got the first one back because he stepped out of the portal into the very room where the book was waiting for him. The one man who actually dug found nothing. Of the 17 people the show puts on screen with one of the journals in their hands, 4 were looking for a book. To everyone else, it came by accident, by family, or by professional duty, to hold, to leaf through, to grab in a fight. Worth saying that list out loud. It strips the object of all solemnity. A goat chewing the corner of a book, 2 out-of-town agents with the 3rd journal, an old man leafing through it in a car, Wendy with a piece of scrap metal in a fight. None of these people were looking for the book, and the book kept ending up with them. The loudest searcher was Gideon. He steals the deed to Stan's house so he can dig on the property, turns the ground over with a shovel, builds a giant robot and takes Mabel hostage, and all of it for one book he never once held. He finds nothing. The journal he's digging for lies floors below him, under that same house, and the one he did have gets taken off him. Dipper makes this list halfway. He found the 3rd book in the woods, where he'd been sent to hammer up signs, so in that minute he wasn't looking for anything. But he spends the whole summer looking for the other 2 and asking out loud where they are. The answer arrives when he goes down into his own basement and trips over both. The 4th searcher is that same shapeshifter from the bunker, 30 years in a cage, listening to a journal being written. He had more time to prepare than all the others together and spent it like this. Waited until the book was in the room, then talked it out of a boy's hands for a few minutes. It ended with him frozen and the book back with the children. That leaves Stan, the only one of the 4 who did end up with all 3. He looked for the 2 missing journals for 30 years, and both arrived beside the search. One fell out of the pocket of a man he was shaking for another reason. The other the boy showed him himself, and Stan borrowed it and walked off with it. There are 46 changes of hands in this story, and not one happened because somebody searched and found. Searching here produced nothing but side effects. A dug-up yard, a robot built for nothing, a prison sentence, a cage, while the book lay quietly somewhere else. That closes the question left hanging after the count of seizures. How many holders were looking for these books? 4 of 17. What the looking got them? Almost nothing. The career these 3 journals had is the career of an object that travels by chance. Dropped, forgotten, handed over, snatched in passing. The truest picture of it is the one we started with. A man who spent half his life searching holds another by the collar and shakes a deed out of him, and the book falls to the floor on its own and lies there until somebody picks it up along with the paper. 3 books are lying in one backpack, and the backpack is on the back of the man who wrote them. That's the 3rd and last time all 3 come together, and it's also the only time the author gathered them himself. Not the boy who found one under a tree, not the brother who spent 30 years hunting for the missing 2. Ford pines, grown, back from a place nobody was supposed to come back from, puts his 3 notebooks into an ordinary knapsack and carries them with him. What happens to a thing when it's no longer needed? A book usually has options. A far shelf, a second-hand shop, a friend, a box in the attic, the children. Shelf, box and air all assume the thing has time. Here, there's no time. First, what the show didn't show. The third journal was Dipper's all summer. He found it, he carried it, he wrote his own notes in it. In the backpack, that journal is already Ford's. The moment the book passed from the boy to the author never appears on screen in any form. No scene, no line, no mention after the fact. Between the 2 points where we know exactly where the book is, there's a blank. A blank in the biography of an object is ordinary. For most old books, nobody knows how they got from one owner to the next, and book historians live with those gaps their whole working lives. The strange part is elsewhere. The show followed these 3 journals almost the entire way. Who picked it up? Who took it off whom? Where it was put? What was said while it happened? And the last handover, the one after which the books finally come together, it's swallowed in silence. The backpack matters more than it sounds. For 30 years these notebooks lay apart, and the place of one of them the show never names. They were hidden, they were dug for, they were taken by force, and one of them had a page torn out. And on their last day they travel together in one bag with straps like school books, and the man who wrote them carries them on his back. He parts with them in a single motion. Ford pushes the backpack toward Dipper and tells him to take his journals. He doesn't get to explain. He starts the sentence and is cut off. He doesn't say which one to read first, doesn't set conditions. He just shoves the bag along the ground toward a 12-year-old. The boy takes the backpack and pulls out the 3rd journal, the one he found in the woods himself. He holds the book up in front of him like a threat, shines an ultraviolet light on it, and the book falls out of his hands. If these books were given one last job, this is it. In its final minute, the 3rd journal works as a threat. It doesn't help. A book filled in by hand at one desk over years ends its service held over a boy's head, playing a weapon he doesn't have. A minute later, the books are lifted into the air and burned. As far as the show goes, that's where the story of these notebooks ends. 3 books that took years to fill, that were hidden, seized, carried off to opposite ends of one town and opposite floors of one house, end together, faster than a page takes to read. An ordinary object reaches this point slowly. It wears out, stops being used seriously, gets an easier job, propping a door, starting a fire, lying in an attic at the heirs. Between the last reading and the stove, decades go by, and in those decades the thing gets resold, given away, lost. Our books never had a day of that old age. They were needed until the last second, and the man who handed them to the boy handed them over as a weapon. The boy stands off to one side. He watches the fire. Then he shouts, "No, the journals." After the fire, the show never brings these books up again, not once. What happens to a thing when it's no longer needed? Here the answer is silence. In the last 2 episodes, people simply stop talking about the books, not one mention out loud. And in the final episode, they aren't on screen either. Nobody picks them up, mourns them, or digs through the rubble for them, and none of the people who held them says a word. The final episode is generous otherwise. It shows in detail who ended up with whom and how it turned out for the town and for each of them. There was room for one short shot of a scorched cover. The shot isn't there. Inside the show itself, nothing at all is shown about any surviving book. Right out in a row, everything the show doesn't say about its 3 central objects, and the list comes out longer than you'd expect from a story this many people have rewatched. Where exactly the 2nd journal lay for 30 years is never named. No address, no hole in the ground, no hiding place, not even a direction. The other 2 we know. The first lay on the lab floor under the house, the 3rd under a hatch in the woods at the entrance to the author's own bunker. About the 2nd, one thing is known. It was hidden. All that's said out loud about it in the whole show is that the author shut his machine down and hid the books that explain how to run it. How the 2nd journal reached Gideon is never shown. A boy who built half his life around that book simply turns up holding it. No finding it, no buying it, no account after the fact. The show never asks itself where he got it. That hole opened at the very start, and it stays open to the last episode. When and how the third journal passed from Dipper to Ford before the final fight is never shown. Why Ford gathered all three before that fight is never explained. He doesn't say he needs them for anything and prepares nothing out of them. Not a word, not a preparation. He just carries them with him, then hands them to a boy. And the last one, the most awkward. The show's creator has nowhere explained why there are 3 books, not in interviews, not in commentary, not in supplementary material. Why there turned out to be exactly 3 notebooks is nowhere spelled out outside the episodes. All these gaps sit at the edges. The middle is written out in detail. Who took what from whom, who lent it, who leafed through it and gave it back. Both ends, where the book came from and how its road ended, are left dark. We know everything about these notebooks except where they surface from and where they go between other people's hands. It looks as though the books always worked here as an occasion for people to meet, fall out and hand each other something that mattered, and their own life between those meetings didn't interest the writers. There's nothing to check that against, so treat it as my impression. That's the list to hold in your hand while you look at the last minutes. 2 episodes before the end, the prison walls come down and Gideon walks out. The same Gideon who turned over half a yard and got nothing. Stan loses his memory and gets all of it back in that same episode. The town news says so out loud. The shack goes to Sue's. Stan himself sails away with his brother, the one whose notebooks he spent half his life looking for. And Dipper simply gets on a bus. Not one of them has a book in his hands. Not a page, not a cover, not a scrap of what these people knocked heads over for 30 years and 1 summer. The house still stands, the lab under it still stands, the desk they were written at still stands. And the people go off about their business, one to a boat, one to a bus, one into a house that's his now, and not one of them thinks of the books on the way. The anthropologist we started with proposed asking a thing the same questions you would ask about a person. Who made it and what its career has been, what its recognized ages are, and the last one, what happens to it when it reaches the end of its usefulness. Our story has an answer to that, and it's short. They were burned. 3 books that Ford Pines kept for years were finished inside a minute. After that, the show never comes back to them, not one shot, not one line, not one conversation, all the way to the end. So the biography ends where the biography of any object ends once it has outlived its use. The usual way to tell this is that the books were the key to the town's secret, and the whole story is about collecting them. It looks to me like the reverse, and here's what that rests on. Across the whole show, the 3 journals were in one place 3 times. Once Stan brought them together and they went to work as a machine part. Pages fitted against pages until the diagram came out whole. The second time they were opened and read. The third time they were simply lying in one backpack when they burned. 3 times in one place and read once. The reader was a 12-year-old boy, and what he read was a plea not to switch the machine on. That's where you can see what was actually divided. The 3 journals are 3 notebooks filled one after another, and on the last page of each, the author left a note about where to look next. Exactly 1 sentence was made secret. The warning that the machine is too powerful and must never be started is broken into 3 parts, 1 to a book, and it comes together only under ultraviolet light, with the books side by side. That sentence has 1 possible reader, the person who already has all 3 lying side by side, which is to say, the person who has already done the thing it warns him about. A book taken apart on purpose isn't an invention of this show. In 1938, a teacher and book dealer named Otto Eeg published an essay calling himself a biblioclast, a breaker of books. He cut medieval manuscripts into single leaves and built sets out of the leaves, 50 leaves to a set. No 2 leaves in a set from the same book, 40 sets in all. Every manuscript went out to 40 addresses, and not one of them stayed whole anywhere. His motive was the exact opposite. He took books apart so more people could put their hands on them. Something else is what matched. Half a century later, researchers began putting those manuscripts back together, one leaf at a time, from different cities, digitally. Of the 40 sets, 28 are on record as found. And his own collection, bought later by a university library, turned out to hold some 50 manuscript books he never touched. At the biblioclast's house, the books stood whole. About our 3 journals, we know the same things, with the same precision. They were taken apart, they were collected, they were burned. Except for one thing the show doesn't say a word about. Once the 3rd journal ended up in a room with a photocopier and a copy was made of it. The witness was a pig. What became of that copy is stated nowhere. It never appears on screen, nobody mentions it, nobody goes looking for it. Of every object in this story, it's the only one you can't say burned. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's a good time. It really does help us out. Dipper, who found the book under the tree, went home on the bus. Ford sailed away with Stan, the same brother who once held the first journal over a lighter. Gideon, who dug in the yard and found nothing, was out of prison earlier than any of them when the walls came down. And somewhere in the house that belongs to Sue's now, there may be a stack of warm paper. And if we're imagining it all the way, the top sheet has the outline of somebody else's hand traced on it. Good night.